Thomas Mackenzie stood on his front porch, coffee mug steaming in the cold morning air. The sun barely peeked over the mountains, casting long shadows across his sprawling ranch. At 62, he had grown accustomed to the silence. The only sounds were the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance, and the wind whistling through the old oak trees his grandfather had planted 50 years ago. His weathered hands gripped the mug tighter as he surveyed his land. 3,000 acres of prime Montana grassland stretched before him, dotted with Angus cattle and crisscrossed by wooden fences he had built and rebuilt countless times. This ranch had been his life, his pride, and increasingly, his prison. Thomas had never married. Not for lack of trying in his younger days, but somehow, love had always slipped through his fingers like sand. Margaret had left him for a banker in Helena when he was 30. Sarah had decided ranch life was too isolated when he was 45. The last serious relationship he had was with Elena, a teacher from the nearby town of Clearwater. That had ended 8 years ago when she moved to California to be closer to her grandchildren. Now, his only companions were his 2 border collies, Rex and Scout, and his aging horse, Midnight. Even his hired hands, Joe and Martinez, only came during the busy seasons. The rest of the year, Thomas worked alone, rising before dawn and falling into bed exhausted after dark, with nothing but the television and his own thoughts for company. The isolation had become harder to bear as the years passed. His sister lived in Denver and called once a month. His brother had died in a car accident 15 years ago. His parents had passed within a year of each other, and sometimes Thomas wondered if he would die the same way they had lived their final years, alone in this big ranch house that had once been filled with 3 generations of Mackenzies. He finished his coffee and pulled on his work gloves. The cattle needed to be checked, the water troughs cleaned, and there was always a fence somewhere that needed mending. It was November, and winter was coming fast. The weatherman on the radio predicted the first real snow of the season within the week. As Thomas walked toward the barn, Rex bounded up to him, tail wagging. The dog was getting old too, his black and white coat now peppered with gray. But he still had the energy of a puppy when it came to ranch work. "Come on, boy," Thomas said, his voice rusty from disuse. Sometimes he realized he had gone entire days without speaking to another human being. "Let's get these cattle moved to the south pasture." The morning passed quietly. Thomas rode Midnight along the fence line, checking for breaks or weak spots. The horse moved carefully, as familiar with this routine as his rider. They had been partners for over 20 years, and Thomas often thought Midnight understood him better than most people ever had. Around noon, Thomas stopped at the creek that ran through his property. The water was running low, as it always did this time of year. But there was still enough for the cattle. He dismounted and knelt by the water's edge, cupping the cold liquid in his hands to splash on his face. That was when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in his quiet world. A car engine, struggling and sputtering, coming up the gravel road that led to his ranch. Thomas rarely had visitors. The UPS truck came occasionally, and Joe or Martinez might stop by to check on him. But this sounded different. Older. More desperate. He mounted Midnight and rode back toward the house. By the time he reached the main gate, he could see an old sedan pulled over to the side of the road, steam rising from under its hood. The driver's door was open, and someone was standing beside the car, but from this distance, Thomas couldn't make out much detail. As he rode closer, he could see it was a woman. She was young, maybe in her 30s, with long brown hair and wearing a thin jacket that was clearly not warm enough for Montana weather. She was shivering, and even from 50 yards away, Thomas could see she was crying. She looked up when she heard Midnight's hooves on the gravel. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her face was streaked with tears. When she saw Thomas approaching on horseback, she took a step back, clearly startled. "Ma'am?" Thomas called out, dismounting and removing his hat in the old-fashioned gesture his father had taught him. "Are you all right?" The woman wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to trespass. My car it just died. And I don't know where I am." Thomas could see she was more than just upset about the car. There was something deeper in her eyes. A kind of panic that went beyond mechanical troubles. She was wearing jeans and sneakers with holes in them, and her jacket looked like it had seen better days. Her hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. "You're not trespassing," Thomas said gently. "This is my ranch, but you're welcome here." "What happened?" The woman looked around nervously, as if she expected someone to appear from behind the trees. I was heading to Billings. But I think I took a wrong turn somewhere, and then the car started making this noise, and then it just stopped." Thomas nodded toward the steaming vehicle. "Mind if I take a look?" She stepped aside as Thomas lifted the hood. Even he could see the problem immediately. The radiator had cracked, and coolant was leaking all over the engine block. This wasn't something that could be fixed on the side of the road. "I'm afraid this isn't going anywhere today," he said, closing the hood. "The radiator's shot. You'll need a tow truck and probably a new part." The woman's face crumpled, and fresh tears started flowing. "No, no, no," she whispered. "This can't happen. I have to get to Billings. I have to." She trailed off and wrapped her arms around herself. Thomas noticed she didn't have any luggage visible in the car. Just a small purse and what looked like a grocery bag in the back seat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "when's the last time you ate something?" She looked at him with surprise, as if she had forgotten about food entirely. This morning, I think. Maybe yesterday morning. I'm not sure." Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself. For 8 years, he had lived alone on this ranch, speaking to almost no one, trusting almost no one. But something about this woman's desperation touched something in him that he thought had died long ago. "Look," he said. "You're not going anywhere today in that car. Why don't you come up to the house? I'll make some coffee and sandwiches, and we can figure out your next move. There's a mechanic in Clearwater, but he won't be open until tomorrow anyway." The woman looked at him suspiciously. "I don't know you." "No, you don't," Thomas agreed. "My name's Thomas Mackenzie. I've lived on this ranch for 40 years. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just offering you a warm place to sit and something to eat." She studied his face for a long moment. Thomas realized how he must look to her. A tall, graying man in work clothes, riding alone on an isolated ranch. But whatever she saw in his expression seemed to reassure her. "My name is Anna," she said finally. "Anna Sullivan." "Nice to meet you, Anna," Thomas said. "Why don't you grab whatever you need from your car, and we'll head up to the house." Anna retrieved her purse and the grocery bag from the back seat. As they walked toward the ranch house, with midnight following behind, Thomas noticed she kept looking over her shoulder at the road, as if she expected someone to follow them. The house was a 2-story farmhouse that Thomas's grandfather had built in 1952. It was sturdy and well-maintained, with a wide front porch and large windows that looked out over the pastures. But as they climbed the front steps, Thomas suddenly became self-conscious about the inside. He hadn't had a guest in years. The house was clean but lived in, with newspapers stacked on the coffee table and dishes in the sink. The furniture was old but comfortable, and the walls were covered with family photos and paintings of ranch scenes. "Sit wherever you like," Thomas said, gesturing to the living room. "I'll put some coffee on and make those sandwiches." Anna perched on the edge of the couch, still clutching her purse. Rex and Scout had followed them inside and were sniffing around her curiously. She reached out tentatively to pet Rex, and the dog immediately warmed to her, resting his head on her knee. "He likes you," Thomas called from the kitchen. Rex doesn't usually take to strangers that quickly. While Thomas worked in the kitchen, he found himself glancing at Anna through the doorway. She was younger than he had first thought, probably in her early 30s. Her brown hair was shoulder-length and wavy, and despite the tears and stress, she was quite pretty. But there was something guarded about the way she sat, as if she were ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. He made ham and cheese sandwiches and brought them out with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Anna accepted the food gratefully and ate quickly, as if she hadn't realized how hungry she was. "This is really good," she said between bites. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Thomas said, settling into his father's old recliner. So you were heading to Billings? Do you have family there? Anna's expression tightened slightly. Something like that. Thomas sensed there was more to the story, but he didn't press. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the gentle snoring of the dogs. This is a beautiful place, Anna said finally, looking out the large picture window at the pastures. Thank you. My grandfather started this ranch in the 50s. My father expanded it, and I've been trying to keep it going ever since. Do you have family helping you? Thomas shook his head. Just me. My brother died some years back, and my sister lives in Denver. Never married. No kids. It's just me and the animals. Anna looked at him with surprise. Don't you get lonely? The question caught Thomas off guard. People rarely asked him such direct, personal questions. Sometimes, he admitted. But I stay busy. There's always something that needs doing on a ranch. But don't you miss having someone to talk to? Someone to share things with? Thomas found himself really looking at Anna for the first time. There was something in her eyes that suggested she understood loneliness all too well. I suppose I do, he said quietly. What about you? Are you traveling alone? Anna's expression closed off immediately. Yes, she said quickly. I'm alone. But the way she said it made Thomas think that being alone was a recent development for her, and not necessarily a welcome one. Outside, the wind had picked up, and Thomas could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The weather forecast had been right about snow coming. Looks like we might get that storm tonight, he said. I should probably take you into town before it hits. There's a motel in Clearwater where you can stay until your car gets fixed. Anna looked out at the darkening sky and bit her lip. How far is town? About 20 miles. She was quiet for a moment, then said, What if the mechanic can't fix it? What if it takes more than a day? Thomas could hear the underlying panic in her voice. Well, Jake's a good mechanic. He's been fixing cars in Clearwater for 30 years. If he can't fix it, he'll know someone who can. But what if? Anna stopped herself and shook her head. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be difficult. You've already been so kind to me. Anna, Thomas said gently, are you running from something? The question hung in the air between them. Anna's hands tightened around her coffee mug, and for a moment, Thomas thought she might bolt for the door. But then her shoulders sagged, and she nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. I am. Thomas felt a protective instinct stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Do you want to talk about it? Anna was quiet for so long that Thomas thought she wasn't going to answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My husband, she said. My ex-husband, I should say. We got divorced 6 months ago, but he won't leave me alone. He keeps showing up at my work, at my apartment, at my friends' houses. He says he just wants to talk, but... She shuddered. Last week, he broke into my apartment while I was sleeping. I woke up and he was just sitting in my bedroom, watching me. Thomas felt his jaw clench. Did you call the police? Anna laughed bitterly. Rick is a police officer. His friends are police officers. They keep telling me he's just having a hard time with the divorce, that he'll calm down eventually. But he's not calming down. He's getting worse. The pieces began to fall into place for Thomas. The desperate look in Anna's eyes, the way she kept checking the road, the minimal belongings in her car. So you left, he said. 3 days ago. I packed what I could carry and just started driving. I thought if I could get to Billings, I have a friend there who might let me stay for a while. But I got lost, and now my car is broken, and I don't know what to do. Outside, the first fat snowflakes began to fall, visible in the light from the porch lamp. Thomas looked at Anna, this frightened, exhausted woman who had stumbled into his quiet life, and made another decision that surprised him. You can stay here tonight, he said. The guest room is made up, and it's warm and safe. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about your car and getting you to Billings. Anna looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. I couldn't impose like that. I don't even know you. No, you don't, Thomas agreed. But I know what it's like to be alone and scared. And I've got plenty of room in this old house. The snow was falling harder now, coating the windows and beginning to accumulate on the ground. Anna watched it for a moment, then looked back at Thomas. Are you sure? She asked. I mean, I'm a complete stranger who showed up crying at your fence. For all you know, I could be lying about everything. Thomas considered this. She was right. He didn't know anything about her except what she had told him. But something in his gut told him she was telling the truth. Maybe it was the genuine fear in her eyes, or the way she had eaten like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days, or simply the fact that in all his years of solitude, he had never met anyone who seemed to need sanctuary as much as Anna Sullivan did. I'm sure, he said. Besides, it looks like that snow is going to make the road pretty treacherous tonight anyway. You're safer here. Anna nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you for this kindness. You don't need to repay anything, Thomas said. Sometimes, we all need a little help. As the evening wore on, Thomas found himself enjoying Anna's company more than he had expected. She helped him prepare a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, and they talked about books and movies and the differences between city life and ranch life. Anna seemed to relax as the hours passed, and Thomas caught glimpses of who she might be when she wasn't running scared. She was smart and funny, with a quick wit and a genuine curiosity about ranch life. She asked thoughtful questions about the cattle and the land, and she seemed genuinely interested in Thomas's stories about growing up on the ranch. It sounds like a wonderful way to grow up, she said, as they cleaned up the dinner dishes. It was, Thomas agreed. Lots of freedom, lots of space to explore. My brother and I used to spend entire days roaming the ranch, building forts and catching frogs in the creek. Do you miss having him around? Thomas was quiet for a moment, loading plates into the dishwasher. Every day, he said finally. David was 2 years younger than me, but he was the one with all the big dreams. He was going to travel the world, maybe become a writer or a photographer. Instead, he stayed here and helped run the ranch until the day he died. What happened to him? Car accident on Highway 2. Black ice. Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact, but Anna could hear the pain underneath it. He was coming back from town with supplies. Another driver lost control and hit him head-on. I'm sorry, Anna said quietly. It's been 15 years, but sometimes I still expect to see him walking through that door. Thomas gestured toward the front of the house. This place feels too big without him sometimes. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Anna felt a pang of sympathy for this gentle man who had opened his home to a stranger. She could see why he had never married. There was something about ranch life that seemed to require a particular kind of person. Someone who could appreciate solitude and hard work and the rhythm of the seasons. By 9 o'clock, the snow was falling steadily, and Thomas had built a fire in the living room fireplace. Anna sat on the couch with Rex curled up beside her, watching the flames dance. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly safe. The guest room is upstairs. First door on the right, Thomas said. There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. And Anna? She looked up at him questioningly. Nobody knows you're here, he said simply. You're safe. Something in his voice, the quiet certainty of it, made Anna feel like she might actually be able to sleep tonight without listening for footsteps in the hallway or car engines in the driveway. Anna woke to the smell of bacon and coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. For a moment, she lay still in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of someone moving around downstairs. Then she remembered where she was, and a feeling of relief washed over her. She had slept through the entire night without waking up in panic. Something that hadn't happened in months. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and photographs of the ranch in different seasons hanging on the walls. Through the window, she could see that the snow had continued falling during the night. The world outside was transformed into a pristine white landscape, with the fence posts wearing caps of snow and the distant mountains barely visible through the gray morning sky. When Anna came down to the kitchen, she found Thomas standing at the stove, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He was already dressed for the day in jeans and a flannel shirt, his gray hair combed back and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a smile. "I hope the smell didn't wake you up." "It did, but in the best possible way," Anna replied. "I haven't smelled breakfast cooking in a long time." Thomas gestured toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself. Mugs are in the cabinet above." As Anna poured herself coffee, she noticed that Thomas had set 2 places at the small kitchen table by the window. It was a homey scene, the kind of morning she had dreamed of having someday but had never quite achieved, even during the early, happy years of her marriage. "How much snow did we get?" she asked, looking out at the transformed landscape. "About 8 inches, and it's still coming down. The road to town won't be passable for a few hours at least. Maybe not until this afternoon." Thomas transferred the bacon to a paper towel-lined plate. "I hope you don't mind being stuck here a little longer." Anna surprised herself by realizing that she didn't mind at all. In fact, the thought of spending another day in this peaceful place filled her with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. "I don't mind," she said. "But I should probably call the mechanic and let him know about my car." "I already called Jake this morning," Thomas said, cracking eggs into the skillet. "Told him about your situation. He said he'll come take a look as soon as the roads are clear, probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning." Anna felt a flutter of anxiety. "Did you tell him? Did you mention anything about why I'm here?" Thomas shook his head. "Just said you were a friend whose car broke down. Jake's been around long enough to mind his own business." The relief on Anna's face was visible, and Thomas felt that protective instinct stir again. He had spent half the night thinking about Anna's situation, wondering what kind of man would terrorize a woman who was clearly trying to rebuild her life. It made him angry in a way he hadn't felt in years. They ate breakfast together as the snow continued to fall outside. Anna asked about the ranch routine, and Thomas explained how the cattle needed to be fed and watered even in bad weather. "Would it be helpful if I came with you?" Anna asked. "I mean, I don't know anything about cattle, but I could learn." Thomas looked at her with surprise. Most of his rare visitors preferred to stay inside where it was warm and comfortable. "Are you sure? It's cold work, and those clothes you're wearing won't keep you very warm." "I have warmer things in my car," Anna said. "And I'd like to help. I feel useless just sitting around while you do all the work." An hour later, Anna found herself trudging through the snow beside Thomas, wearing an extra pair of his work gloves and a heavy coat she had retrieved from her car. The cold air stung her cheeks, but she found the physical activity invigorating after so many days of sitting in the car and worrying. Thomas was patient as he taught her how to break the ice on the water troughs and how to distribute hay to the cattle. The animals were beautiful. Large, sturdy Angus with thick winter coats and intelligent eyes. They seemed to know Thomas well, gathering around him as he worked. "That big fellow there is Napoleon," Thomas said, pointing to a massive bull who stood slightly apart from the herd. "He thinks he runs the place." "Does he?" Anna asked, keeping a respectful distance. "Some days I'm not entirely sure," Thomas replied with a grin. Anna laughed, and Thomas realized it was the first time he had heard her really laugh. The sound was musical and genuine, and it made something in his chest feel lighter. As they worked, Anna found herself opening up about her life before she started running. She told Thomas about her job as a librarian in a small town in North Dakota, how she had loved helping people find the right books and organizing reading programs for children. She talked about her small apartment with its window boxes full of herbs and the cat she had been forced to leave with a neighbor. "Do you miss it?" Thomas asked as they walked back toward the house, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. "The work, yes. The sense of purpose. I loved being surrounded by books and helping people discover new stories." Anna was quiet for a moment. "But I don't miss the fear. The last 6 months, I was afraid to be alone in my own apartment. Afraid to walk to my car after work. Afraid to answer my phone." Thomas felt his jaw tighten again. "What kind of cop was he? Your ex-husband?" Anna glanced at him sharply. What makes you think he was a good cop? I don't, Thomas said simply. But there are different kinds of bad cops. Some are just lazy or corrupt, others are dangerous. The way Anna's face went pale told Thomas everything he needed to know. Rick is, the kind who thinks the badge gives him the right to do whatever he wants, she said quietly. He was charming when we first met. Protective. I thought it was sweet how he wanted to take care of me. They had reached the porch, and Thomas stamped the snow off his boots before opening the door. Inside, the warmth was a welcome relief, and Rex and Scout greeted them enthusiastically. When did it change? Thomas asked gently as they hung up their coats. Anna was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the snow-covered pastures. Slowly. At first, he started checking my phone, wanting to know where I was all the time. He said it was because he loved me, because his job made him see how dangerous the world could be. Then he started getting angry. When I spent time with friends, or worked late at the library. She sat down heavily on the couch, and Thomas settled into his chair, giving her space to continue if she wanted to. The first time he hit me was 2 years ago, Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was drunk, and I had forgotten to record a TV show he wanted to watch. He slapped me and then immediately started crying, saying he was sorry, that the stress of his job was getting to him. Thomas felt his hands clench into fists, but he kept his voice calm. And you stayed. I stayed, Anna confirmed. He convinced me it was a one-time thing. He sent flowers to the library the next day and took me on a romantic weekend trip. For a few months, things were good again, but it happened again, Anna nodded. And again. And each time, he had a reason. Each time, he convinced me it was my fault somehow, that if I had just been more understanding, more supportive, he wouldn't lose his temper. Thomas had heard stories like this before, from his sister and from women in town. But hearing it from Anna, seeing the pain in her eyes, made it real in a way that statistics and news stories never could. When did you decide to leave? He asked. The night he broke into my apartment. I had been separated from him for 3 months, living in my own place, starting to feel like myself again. But he kept showing up, kept insisting we could work things out. That night, when I woke up and he was just sitting there in the dark, watching me sleep. Anna shuddered. I knew he was never going to stop. I knew that if I stayed in that town, I would end up dead. The stark simplicity of that statement hung in the air between them. Thomas looked at this brave woman who had left everything she knew to save her own life, and he felt something shift inside him. For 8 years, he had been content with his solitude, convinced that he was better off alone. But watching Anna's courage in the face of such fear made him realize that some kinds of loneliness were chosen, and others were imposed. So you packed up and left, he said. I threw some clothes in a grocery bag and drove away in the middle of the night. I had about $300 in cash, and no real plan except to get as far away as possible. Anna looked around the warm, comfortable living room. I certainly never expected to end up on a cattle ranch in Montana. Are you sorry you did? Anna considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. Even though my car is broken and I have no idea what I'm going to do next, I feel safer here than I have in months. Thomas felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the fireplace. It had been so long since anyone had found comfort in his presence, since he had been able to offer something meaningful to another person. You could stay longer, he heard himself saying. I mean, if you wanted to. There's no rush to get to Billings. Anna looked at him with surprise. Thomas, I couldn't ask you to do that. You've already done so much for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. Thomas realized he meant it completely. This place is too big for one person anyway. And you're good company. Before Anna could respond, they heard the sound of a vehicle coming up the driveway. Thomas went to the window and peered out through the falling snow. It's Jake, he said, the mechanic. Anna felt her stomach clench with anxiety. Having the car looked at meant making decisions about what came next. It meant leaving this sanctuary and facing the uncertain future she had been trying not to think about. Jake Miller was a grizzled man in his 60s who had been fixing cars in Clearwater since before Thomas was born. He drove a pickup truck with a snow plow attachment and a toolbox in the back that seemed to contain solutions for every mechanical problem in 3 counties. Thomas introduced Anna as a friend, and Jake tipped his hat politely before walking over to examine her sedan. The news wasn't good. The radiator was completely shot, and the engine had overheated badly enough to potentially cause more extensive damage. "I can order you a new radiator," Jake said, wiping his hands on a rag. "But it'll take at least a week to get here. And that's assuming the engine block isn't cracked." Anna felt her hopes sink. A week was too long to impose on Thomas's hospitality, but she didn't have enough money for a rental car or a motel room for that long, and if the engine was damaged too, the repair costs might be more than the car was worth. "What about buying a different car?" Thomas asked. "Do you have anything on your lot that might work?" Jake scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I've got a few older vehicles that might suit you. Nothing fancy, but they run good. There's a 2008 Honda Civic that just came in. Needs a little work, but it's reliable." Anna calculated quickly in her head. Even if Jake gave her a good deal on a used car, she would barely have enough money left to get to Billings, let alone start a new life there. "Could I think about it?" she asked. "Maybe look at the car tomorrow?" "Sure thing," Jake said. "No hurry. I'll check with my supplier about that radiator, just in case you want to fix this one." After Jake left, Thomas and Anna sat in the kitchen with fresh coffee, not talking about the obvious question that hung between them. Finally, Anna spoke. "I should probably call my friend in Billings," she said. "Let her know what's happening." Thomas nodded and handed her his cordless phone. Anna dialed a number and waited while it rang. When someone finally answered, Anna's face brightened. "Jenny, it's Anna." "Yes, I'm okay. I'm in Montana." "No, I'm safe. Listen. My car broke down, and I'm not going to make it to Billings for at least a week." Thomas stepped out to give Anna privacy, but he could hear the conversation through the thin walls of the old house. Jenny was apparently having second thoughts about harboring a fugitive from an abusive ex-husband. She had children to think about, and a job to protect. Maybe Anna could find somewhere else to stay, just until things died down. When Anna hung up the phone, Thomas could see that she was fighting back tears. "She's scared," Anna said simply. "Jenny's scared that Rick will track me down and cause trouble for her family. I don't blame her. I would probably feel the same way if I were in her position." Thomas sat down across from Anna at the kitchen table. Outside, the snow was still falling, but more gently now. The worst of the storm seemed to be passing. "So what are your options?" he asked gently. Anna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't really have any. I have enough money to either buy that used car or fix this one, but not both. And even if I get mobile again, I don't have anywhere to go." "What about other friends? Family?" "My parents died in a car accident when I was in college. I have an aunt in Oregon, but we're not close. Most of my friends back home." Anna shrugged. "Rick made sure I didn't have many friends left. He had a way of making people uncomfortable when they came around." Thomas felt his anger toward Rick Sullivan flare again. It wasn't enough for the man to terrorize his wife. He had systematically isolated her from everyone who might have helped her. "Anna," Thomas said carefully, "I meant what I said earlier. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to. There's no timeline, no pressure." Anna looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thomas, I can't just move in with a stranger. What would people think? What would your neighbors say?" "I don't have neighbors," Thomas pointed out with a slight smile. "The nearest ranch is 12 miles away, and Bill Henderson minds his own business. As for people in town, well, they've been speculating about my personal life for years anyway. Might as well give them something interesting to talk about." Anna studied his face, looking for any sign that this was an impulsive gesture he might regret, but Thomas's expression was steady and sincere. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me, really. I could be lying about everything." Thomas considered her question seriously. "I suppose you could be," he agreed. "But I don't think you are." And even if you were, what's the worst that could happen? You steal my silverware and disappear in the night? I can afford to replace some forks and knives. But what do you get out of it? I mean, I'm grateful beyond words, but I don't understand why you would want a stranger living in your house. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the snow-covered ranch. How could he explain that having her here had made him realize how much he had missed simple human companionship? How could he tell her that for the first time in 8 years, he had woken up looking forward to the day ahead? This house has been too quiet for too long, he said finally. Maybe we both need a place to heal. Anna felt tears spring to her eyes, not tears of fear or desperation this time, but tears of relief and gratitude. She had been running for days, scared and alone, with no plan beyond getting as far away from Rick as possible. She had never imagined that she might find sanctuary with a stranger who asked for nothing in return except company. What would I do here? She asked practically. I can't just be a house guest indefinitely. There's always work to be done on a ranch, Thomas said. And I could use help with the books, keeping track of cattle sales and expenses and such. If you're interested, that is, Anna nodded slowly. I'm very interested. And Thomas? Yes? Thank you. I know you don't know me well enough to trust me with your home and your kindness, but thank you for taking the chance. Thomas reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for giving me someone to take chances for again. That evening, they made dinner together, a simple meal of spaghetti and salad, but it felt like a celebration. They talked about books and movies, and their different experiences growing up in small towns. Anna told Thomas about her college years and her dreams of maybe becoming a writer someday. Thomas shared stories about the ranch in different seasons and the challenges of keeping a family business running in an increasingly corporate agricultural world. As the evening wore on, Anna found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't been able to for months. There was something about Thomas's steady presence that made her feel safe to be herself. Not the frightened woman who had been running from her past, but the person she had been before fear took over her life. When they finally said goodnight, and Anna climbed the stairs to her room, she realized that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, leaving the ranch blanketed in pristine white under a sky full of stars. In his own room, Thomas lay awake for a while, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving around in his house. It was a good sound, a sound that made the big old ranch house feel like a home again instead of just a place where he ate and slept between long days of work. For both of them, sleep came easily that night, and for both of them, there were no nightmares. 3 weeks later, Anna was kneeling in Thomas's kitchen garden, pulling the last of the winter vegetables from the partially frozen ground. The work was harder than anything she had done as a librarian, but she found satisfaction in the physical nature of it that surprised her. Her hands were rough now, calloused from ranch work, but they were steady hands that no longer shook when she heard unexpected noises. The arrangement had worked out better than either of them had dared to hope. Anna had taken over the ranch's bookkeeping and correspondence, organizing Thomas's haphazard filing system and setting up a simple computer system for tracking expenses and cattle sales. In return, Thomas had taught her about ranch life, how to drive the old pickup truck, how to mend fences, and how to read weather patterns in the Montana sky. More importantly, they had settled into a comfortable routine that felt natural to both of them. They took turns cooking breakfast, worked together during the day, and spent evenings reading or talking by the fire. Anna had even convinced Thomas to get internet service so she could research better cattle management practices and help him set up an online presence for selling beef directly to customers. The only shadow over their newfound contentment was the knowledge that Rick was still out there somewhere. Anna had checked in with her former neighbor twice, using Thomas's phone, and learned that Rick had been to her old apartment several times, demanding to know where she had gone. He had also visited the library, questioning her former colleagues, and creating enough of a scene that the head librarian had finally called his police department to complain. But as the days passed without any sign of him, Anna began to let herself believe that maybe he had given up, that maybe she could actually build a new life in this remote corner of Montana. On a Thursday morning in early December, that illusion was shattered. Anna was in the barn, helping Thomas repair a broken harness, when Rex started barking furiously outside. Both dogs were usually calm around visitors, so the intensity of Rex's barking immediately put Thomas on alert. "Stay here," he told Anna, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted on the barn wall. But Anna had already looked through the barn's small window and seen the patrol car coming up the gravel driveway. Her blood went cold as she recognized the aggressive way the car was being driven. Too fast for the conditions, with no regard for the animals that might be in the road. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Rick." Thomas felt every protective instinct in his body surge to life. Over the past 3 weeks, he had watched Anna slowly emerge from the shell of fear she had been living in. He had seen her laugh again, had watched her confidence return as she mastered new skills and found her place on the ranch. The thought of this man taking that away from her filled him with a cold fury he had never experienced before. "Get to the house and call the sheriff," Thomas said quietly, checking to make sure the rifle was loaded. "Tell them we have an unwelcome visitor making threats." "Thomas, no," Anna said, grabbing his arm. "You don't understand. He's a cop. He knows how to make this look like your fault." "He's not a cop here," Thomas replied grimly. "And this is my land." Through the window, they could see Rick Sullivan getting out of his patrol car. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive posture that announced his authority. Even from a distance, Anna could see that he was angry, angrier than she had ever seen him. "Anna," Rick's voice carried across the ranch yard. "I know you're here. Come out here right now, and we can settle this without involving your new friend." Thomas stepped outside the barn, rifle held casually but visibly in his hands. Rex and Scout flanked him, their hackles raised and low growls rumbling in their chests. "You're trespassing," Thomas said calmly. "This is private property. And you weren't invited." Rick turned his attention to Thomas, looking him up and down with obvious contempt. "You must be the old man who's been hiding my wife. I'm Officer Rick Sullivan, and I'm here to collect what belongs to me." "Anna doesn't belong to anyone," Thomas replied, his voice still calm but with an edge that Rick was too angry to notice. "And she's not your wife anymore. Now get off my land." Rick laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Old man, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm a police officer, and I have reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive." "What crime has Anna committed?" Thomas asked. Rick's face flushed red. "She stole my property when she left. My grandmother's jewelry, money from our joint account. That makes her a thief." From inside the barn, Anna could hear every word. She knew Rick was lying. She had only taken things that belonged to her, and she had closed their joint account legally during the divorce proceedings. But she also knew that Rick was smart enough to have fabricated evidence to support his story. "Even if that were true," Thomas said, "you're out of your jurisdiction here. If you want to make accusations, you'll need to go through proper channels." "I don't think you understand," Rick said, stepping closer to Thomas. "I'm taking Anna home today, whether you like it or not. And if you try to interfere, I'll arrest you for obstruction of justice." Thomas studied Rick's face and saw something that chilled him. The look of a man who had already decided that violence was the solution to his problem. This wasn't a rational police officer following proper procedure. This was an abuser who had been denied his victim, and who was prepared to do anything to get her back. "Anna," Thomas called, not taking his eyes off Rick. "Call Sheriff Morrison right now." Rick's face twisted with rage. "You son of a bitch. You think you can steal another man's wife and get away with it?" He reached for his service weapon, but Thomas was ready for him. Years of hunting and ranch work had kept Thomas's reflexes sharp, and he had his rifle raised before Rick could clear his holster. "Don't," Thomas said quietly. "Don't make me do something we'll both regret." For a moment, the two men faced each other across the snow-covered yard, weapons drawn, while the dogs continued their low growling. Then Anna appeared in the barn doorway. "Rick, stop," she called out. "Just stop. This isn't about Thomas. This is between you and me." Rick's attention immediately shifted to Anna, and Thomas could see the obsessive hunger in the other man's eyes. It was the look of someone who viewed Anna as property he had been robbed of, not as a person with her own choices to make. "Anna, honey," Rick said, his voice suddenly shifting to a sickeningly sweet tone. "You've had your little adventure. but it's time to come home now. I've been worried sick about you. I am home, Anna said, stepping out of the barn to stand beside Thomas. This is where I choose to be. Rick's facade of concern dropped instantly. You choose? He snarled. You don't get to choose. You're my wife. We took vows. We're divorced, Anna said firmly. I have the papers to prove it. Those papers don't mean anything. Not to me. Rick's hand moved toward his weapon again. You're coming home with me, Anna. Today. Thomas could see that Rick was beyond reasoning, past the point where law enforcement training might override his rage. He was about to do something irreversible, and Thomas knew he had seconds to prevent it. Rick, Thomas said sharply, drawing the man's attention back to him. Look around you. You're on a working ranch, with neighbors who know I'm here. You think you can just disappear 2 people and drive away? You think Sheriff Morrison won't investigate when the neighbors report seeing a patrol car here? For the first time, Rick seemed to consider the situation tactically rather than emotionally. He was indeed far from his own jurisdiction, on property that didn't belong to him, threatening armed citizens who had every right to defend themselves. But his obsession with Anna overrode his common sense. I don't care, he said. I don't care what happens to me. She's not staying here with you. He started to draw his weapon again, and this time Thomas didn't hesitate. The rifle shot echoed across the ranch, sending cattle scrambling in the distant pastures. Rick spun around and fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder and screaming in pain and rage. Thomas immediately lowered the rifle and rushed forward, kicking Rick's service weapon away before kneeling beside him. The wound was clean. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of Rick's shoulder, without hitting bone or major arteries. Anna, get the first aid kit from the house, Thomas called, and check if you got through to the sheriff. Anna was already moving, but she called back. Sheriff Morrison is on his way. Should be here in 20 minutes. Rick was cursing and threatening as Thomas applied pressure to stop the bleeding, but Thomas ignored the words. He had done what he had to do to protect Anna and himself, and he felt no regret about it. You shot a police officer, Rick gasped between curses. Your life is over, old man. I'll see you in prison for this. You're not a police officer here, Thomas replied calmly. You're just a man with a gun who threatened 2 people on their own property. Any jury in Montana will see it that way. When Sheriff Morrison arrived with 2 deputies, he found Rick secured with rope from the barn, his wound treated and bandaged, while Thomas and Anna waited calmly on the front porch. Morrison was a longtime friend of Thomas's family and had heard enough stories about domestic violence cases to quickly understand what had happened. Rick's story, that he was a police officer in pursuit of a fugitive, quickly fell apart under questioning. He had no warrant, no jurisdiction in Montana, and no evidence of the theft he claimed Anna had committed. When Morrison called Rick's police department in North Dakota, he learned that Rick was actually on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into domestic violence allegations. The district attorney later declined to file charges against Thomas, ruling that he had acted in lawful defense of himself and Anna against an armed intruder. Rick, on the other hand, faced charges for assault, trespassing, and making false statements to a police officer. More importantly, the incident triggered a more thorough investigation into his conduct as a police officer, which ultimately led to his dismissal from the force. But all of that came later. On the afternoon when Sheriff Morrison's car finally disappeared down the gravel road, taking Rick away in custody, Thomas and Anna sat on their front porch in the gathering dusk, each holding a cup of coffee and watching the sun set behind the mountains. Is it over? Anna asked quietly. It's over, Thomas confirmed. Even if he makes bail, he won't be able to come back here. Morrison will make sure of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing the events of the day. Finally, Anna spoke again. I keep thinking about what he said. About me being his wife. About those vows meaning something. Thomas looked at her with concern. You don't believe that, do you? Anna shook her head. No. But it made me think about what vows should mean. About promises that people make to each other when they really mean them. Thomas felt his heart beat a little faster. Over the past 3 weeks, he had found himself thinking about Anna in ways that went beyond simple companionship. She had brought life back to his ranch and to his daily routine. But more than that, she had reminded him what it felt like to care deeply about another person's happiness. "Anna," he said carefully, "are you planning to stay? I mean, permanently?" Anna turned to look at him, and Thomas saw something in her eyes that made him hope he wasn't misreading the situation. "That depends," she said. "Are you asking me to stay?" Thomas set down his coffee cup and took Anna's hands in his. They were working hands now, strong and capable, but they were still gentle. "I'm asking you to stay," he said. "Not as a refugee or a house guest, but as my partner. In all of this." He gestured toward the ranch, spread out before them. Anna felt her heart fill with something she had almost given up on. The possibility of a love based on trust and respect rather than possession and control. "Yes," she said simply. "I want to stay. I want to build something real here with you." Thomas leaned over and kissed her then, gentle and tentative at first. Then with more certainty as she kissed him back. It was a kiss that tasted like new beginnings and second chances, like the promise of morning after a long, dark night. 6 months later, on a warm spring day with wildflowers blooming in the pastures, Anna and Thomas were married in the living room of the ranch house. Sheriff Morrison performed the ceremony, with Anna's aunt from Oregon and Thomas's sister from Denver as witnesses. The wedding was simple and small, but it felt complete in a way that Anna's first wedding never had. Anna had legally changed her name back to her maiden name, Anna Walsh. And after the ceremony, she became Anna Mackenzie. But more than the name change, what mattered was the feeling of belonging somewhere, of being valued for who she was, rather than controlled for what she could provide. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Anna's organizational skills and Thomas's deep knowledge of the land proved to be a perfect combination. They expanded their direct sales operation, started a small farmers market business, and even began offering ranch tours for city families who wanted to show their children what real farm life was like. But the real success was simpler than any business achievement. It was the sound of laughter in the kitchen during morning coffee. It was working side by side in comfortable silence, each knowing what the other needed without having to ask. It was the way Anna no longer startled at unexpected noises, and the way Thomas no longer went entire days without speaking to another human being. On evenings when they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Thomas sometimes marveled at the chain of events that had brought Anna into his life. If her car hadn't broken down on that particular stretch of road, if he hadn't decided to offer help to a crying stranger, if she hadn't been brave enough to accept sanctuary from someone she didn't know, any of those things could have gone differently, and they might never have found each other. But Anna insisted that it wasn't coincidence that had brought them together. It was two people who had been lonely for too long, recognizing something in each other that they desperately needed. It was the kind of connection that happens when someone stops running from fear and someone else stops hiding from hope. 3 years after that snowy December day when Anna first appeared at Thomas's fence, they were still discovering new things about each other, still finding ways to support and challenge and delight each other. The ranch had become truly theirs, not just a place where Thomas lived and worked, but a home they had built together. And if sometimes Anna still woke from dreams about her old life, she found comfort in reaching across the bed and finding Thomas there, solid and warm and real. If sometimes Thomas wondered what he had done to deserve such unexpected happiness, he found his answer in Anna's smile and in the sound of her voice calling his name across the pastures. The ranch that had once been too quiet was filled with life now. There were plans for expanding the herd, talk of maybe getting some horses, and dreams of children who might someday run through these same fields where Thomas and his brother had played as boys. But even without those future possibilities, what they had already built was enough. More than enough. It was the kind of love story that neither of them had thought possible. Not the passionate, dramatic kind that burns bright and fast, but the steady, enduring kind that grows stronger with each passing season. On their third wedding anniversary, Anna found Thomas standing in the same spot where he had been that first morning when she had appeared at his fence. He was holding his coffee mug and watching the sunrise, but now he wasn't alone. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. "I'm thinking about a broken-down car and a crying woman, and the best decision I ever made in my life." Thomas said, pulling her closer. Which decision was that? To offer help to a stranger, Thomas said. And then to ask her to stay. Anna smiled and leaned into his warmth. And I'm thinking about the best decision I ever made, which was to trust that not all men are like Rick. To believe that sometimes, when you're running away from something terrible, you might run straight into something wonderful. They stood together in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, cattle moved slowly across the pastures, and Rex and Scout bounded through the tall grass, chasing scents only they could detect. It was a peaceful scene, a scene of belonging and contentment. It was the kind of morning that Thomas had once thought he would never share with anyone, and the kind of safety that Anna had once thought she would never feel again. But they had found it together. Two people who had learned that sometimes the best things in life come not when you're looking for them, but when you're brave enough to accept them when they appear, shivering and desperate, at your fence in the middle of a snowstorm. The rancher who had thought he would die alone had discovered that he was wrong about many things, and the woman who had run away from everything she knew had found that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one.